Poor black girl asks Billionaire, "Can I sleep in your doghouse?" What he does next shocks everyone. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. The night was cold, the wind howling through the empty streets. The light from the mansions on the hill cast a warm glow, a stark contrast to the bitter chill of the city below. At the edge of a sprawling estate, a small figure stood alone, soaked from the rain, her face a mask of quiet determination. She was no more than 10 years old, but there was a strength in her eyes, a resolve that told a story of hardship and survival. In her small, trembling hands, she held a weathered bag that had seen better days. She looked up at the mansion before her, the grandest of them all. The windows gleamed. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses could be heard from the inside. A part of her wanted to turn away, to disappear back into the shadows of the city, but the other part, the one that had fought for so long to stay alive, pushed her forward. She approached the front gate, her feet clicking softly on the stone path, the cold seeping through her worn shoes. She stopped at the edge of the driveway, hesitating for a moment. Then, gathering all the courage she could muster, she called out, her voice barely a whisper. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her words trembling in the air. "Can I sleep in your doghouse?" The words hung there, suspended between the two worlds. On one side, there was the opulence and warmth of the mansion. On the other, the harsh, unforgiving streets that had become her reality. The man who stood on the other side of the gate was a billionaire, one of the most powerful men in the city. His name was Thomas Carlyle, and he had built his empire from the ground up. He was used to people needing him, but never in this way. He looked down at the small girl standing in front of him, soaking wet, her eyes wide with hope. For a moment, he was speechless. He had seen poverty before, had heard stories of people living on the edge, but this was different. The girl wasn't asking for charity. She wasn't begging for handouts. She was asking for shelter, for a place to rest her head, and she was willing to take whatever she could get. The silence stretched between them, the weight of the moment hanging in the air. Finally, he stepped forward, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "Why the doghouse?" he asked, his voice low and incredulous. She met his gaze, her expression steady. "It's all I need, sir," she replied, her voice firm despite the fear that churned in her stomach. She wasn't afraid of him, but she was afraid of what would happen if she didn't get help. For the first time in his life, Thomas Carlyle felt something he hadn't expected. He felt a flicker of something deep inside him. Compassion, maybe, or guilt. He wasn't sure. But in that moment, he knew he couldn't let this little girl walk away. "Come with me," he said, his voice softer now, almost a whisper. He opened the gate, stepping aside to let her pass. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward, the weight of her decision settling in her chest. What would he do next? What would happen now? She didn't know, but she was ready to find out. "I've opened the gate," the words echoing softly in the night. And for the first time, the little girl stepped through it, crossing from the cold streets into the warmth of a world she had never imagined. The sound of her wet shoes against the polished marble path felt like a strange contrast to the grand surroundings. And yet, as she walked toward the door of the mansion, a small part of her, almost imperceptible, felt a flicker of hope. Thomas watched her silently as she walked ahead, unsure of what to say or how to feel. He had invited her inside, but he had no idea what would come next. The girl was silent, her steps hesitant but sure. He followed her inside, the warmth of the foyer enveloping her instantly. The soft glow of chandeliers above made the space feel like another world, one she had only heard about in stories. But she didn't let herself get lost in it. Her eyes were focused straight ahead, looking for a place to rest. As Thomas led her further into the house, he noticed her hands shaking slightly, her posture stiff, as though she was afraid of breaking the fragile peace between them. "I'll get you something to change into," he said, his voice soft but filled with an unfamiliar compassion. She nodded quietly, her eyes wide and unsure of what to expect. She couldn't help but feel small in this place, like she didn't belong. The walls were lined with expensive art, and the floors beneath her feet felt so smooth, so perfect. She stood there for a moment, her gaze drifting around the room, before looking back at Thomas. He was standing there, his brow furrowed slightly, as though he was trying to figure out the right way to handle this situation. She could see the confusion in his eyes. After a long pause, he motioned toward a hallway. "I'll have someone bring you some food, too," he said. "You must be hungry." The girl nodded, but she didn't feel hungry. What she felt was a strange emptiness, like this kindness was too much to take in. She had spent most of her life just trying to survive, scraping by each day. This was a different world, one where people had everything and she had nothing. She tried to push the thoughts aside. She couldn't afford to think about that right now. But she couldn't stop the nervousness from creeping up inside her. She was in a stranger's house, and she didn't even know why she had asked to sleep in the doghouse. She couldn't understand why she had said those words, or why he had agreed. It wasn't like her to ask for help. Her grandmother had taught her to be independent, to never rely on anyone else. She had never needed anything, never wanted to take from anyone. And yet, here she was. She thought about her grandmother, about the nights they spent huddled together in their small apartment, her grandmother's comforting voice telling her everything would be okay. But now, her grandmother was gone. It felt like the world had shifted, like she had been left in the middle of something that didn't make sense. She snapped back to reality as Thomas reappeared, holding a warm set of clothes for her. "Here," he said gently, "these should fit." She took the clothes from him, feeling a strange weight in her chest as she held them. The kindness felt almost unbearable. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Thomas gave her a small, reassuring smile. "No need to thank me," he said, but there was something in his tone that made her believe he meant it. He led her to a small guest room off to the side, with a bed neatly made and soft blankets folded at the foot. The room felt foreign to her, but at the same time, it was more comfortable than anything she had ever known. As she stood there, holding the clothes, she felt a sense of deep gratitude. But it was mixed with something else, something she couldn't explain. As she changed into the clothes, she glanced at herself in the mirror. She hardly recognized the girl in front of her. She had always been the girl who wore old, tattered clothes, the girl who always kept to the shadows. But now, in these new clothes, she felt like she was someone else, someone who could belong. When she came out of the room, Thomas was waiting for her. He motioned for her to sit at the small dining table nearby. A tray of food had been set out for her, bread, soup, and some fruit. It wasn't much, but it was more than she had ever had at once. "Eat," Thomas said, sitting across from her. He didn't seem like the kind of man who often sat down for a meal with someone like her. But he did. The awkwardness between them hung in the air, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was like they were both trying to figure out how to make this situation work. She picked up the spoon slowly, feeling the weight of his gaze on her. The food was warm, and as she took a bite, she realized how hungry she had been. She ate in silence, occasionally glancing up at Thomas, who was watching her closely but without judgment. He seemed to be waiting for something, maybe for her to say something, but she wasn't sure what to say. She had never been in a situation like this before. She had never been treated with kindness like this. When she finished, Thomas pushed the tray aside and leaned back in his chair. "I'm glad you're here," he said softly, his voice a little more relaxed now. "I know it's a lot to take in." She didn't say anything at first, just sat there, absorbing his words. He wasn't like the others, the people she had met in her life. There was something different about him. She could see it in the way he looked at her, like he saw something in her that she couldn't quite understand. Maybe it was pity, or maybe it was something more. But in that moment, she wasn't sure she cared. She just wanted to believe that for once, someone would actually keep their word, someone would actually help her without expecting anything in return. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice quiet but sincere. "Thank you for everything." Thomas smiled again, a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, but it was enough. "You're welcome," he said. "You don't have to thank me." She nodded, but inside, she felt a spark of something that hadn't been there before. Hope. It was a strange, foreign feeling, but it was there. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to feel it. The days passed quietly, and the mansion that once felt so alien to her began to feel more like a strange new home. The first morning after she arrived, the housekeeper, a warm woman named Carol, showed her to the breakfast table. The soft clink of silverware and the smell of freshly baked bread filled the air, but for the girl, it was almost overwhelming. She had never been surrounded by such luxury, yet the food before her felt like nothing more than a symbol of the distance between her and the life she knew. Carol smiled at her gently as she placed a bowl of oatmeal in front of her. "Eat up," she said, her voice soft. "There's plenty more where that came from." The girl looked up at her, the words catching in her throat. She wasn't used to this kind of kindness, not from strangers, not from anyone who had something to offer. She had lived her whole life learning how to survive, how to scrape by, never asking for more than what she could take on her own. But here, in this strange place, she didn't know what to do with it. She took a small bite of the oatmeal, her hand shaking slightly as she did. The warm food filled her stomach, but it also made her feel exposed, vulnerable. She wasn't used to having things given to her without strings attached. She glanced up at Thomas, who was sitting at the end of the table, his usual calm demeanor intact. He hadn't spoken much since the night before, only offering her a place to sleep and food to eat. She couldn't tell if he saw her as a charity case or if he genuinely wanted to help. She had never known anyone who cared enough to do anything without expecting something in return. "Are you sure this is okay?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas looked at her, his brow furrowing slightly as he studied her. "Of course it's okay," he said simply. "You're safe here." She nodded, but her eyes didn't leave the food in front of her. "Thank you," she said softly. Thomas didn't respond, but he did offer a small, reassuring smile. She wasn't sure if it was genuine or just out of obligation, but it made her feel slightly less alone. Later that afternoon, Thomas took her for a walk around the grounds of the estate. The sprawling gardens and manicured lawns seemed endless, like something from a dream. The girl had never seen anything like it before. She had always been used to cramped spaces, crowded streets, and the constant noise of the city. But here, it was quiet, peaceful. They walked in silence for a while, the sound of their footsteps the only thing breaking the stillness. Finally, Thomas spoke. "So, tell me about yourself. What's your story?" His voice was calm, almost too calm, as if he were testing the waters. The girl hesitated, unsure of how much to say. She didn't want to be a burden, to make him feel sorry for her. She had always been taught to keep her struggles to herself, to never let anyone see her weakness. But here, in this quiet space, she felt like she could finally let her guard down. "I used to live with my grandmother," she said slowly, her voice steady despite the pain she felt. "She raised me. We didn't have much, but we made do." She paused, swallowing. Hard as memories of her grandmother flooded her mind. "She passed away a few months ago." The words felt like a weight in her chest. Thomas didn't say anything at first, just walked beside her, his eyes fixed ahead. She could feel his gaze on her, though, and it made her uncomfortable. She wasn't used to being the center of anyone's attention, especially not someone like him. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said after a moment, his voice soft. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She had never felt this vulnerable, this exposed. "It's okay," she said finally, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. "I've learned to take care of myself." She didn't say it with pride, but with a quiet resignation. She had learned to survive, and that was all that mattered. But as they continued their walk, something began to shift inside her. She realized that, for the first time in a long time, she wasn't alone. She didn't have to fight to survive on her own anymore. Thomas didn't ask for anything in return. He didn't want her to prove her worth, to earn his kindness. She wasn't used to that. As they reached the far end of the garden, Thomas stopped and turned to her. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "you don't have to stay in the guest room anymore. You can have your own space. I have a room upstairs that's just been sitting empty." The girl looked at him, surprised. "Are you sure?" she asked. He nodded, his expression serious. "It's yours if you want it." She didn't know what to say. She had never been offered something like this, not without a price. But in that moment, she realized that it wasn't just the room that he was offering her. It was the chance to have a life beyond survival. She could breathe. She could be something more than just a girl who had to fight to stay alive. She didn't have to prove anything to him, to anyone. She just had to be herself. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "I think I'd like that." Thomas smiled at her, and this time, it felt different. It felt real. For the first time since she had arrived, she believed that maybe, just maybe, she could have a future here. I walked down the hallway of the mansion, the floors beneath my feet soft with the plush carpet, the grandeur of the space overwhelming in its quiet luxury. I had been given a room, a real room this time. It was large and well-furnished, the bed made up with fresh sheets, the walls adorned with tasteful art that I couldn't even begin to appreciate. I was still getting used to the silence that came with all this space, and the emptiness that had settled in my chest since my grandmother passed away. Despite the comfort of the room, the comfort of the food, the comfort of not having to survive every single day, I felt like an outsider. I felt like I didn't belong. Every corner of this house reminded me of what I had never had and what I could never afford to own: luxury, stability, peace. I felt out of place, like I didn't fit here. I wandered around the room, touching the soft fabrics of the curtains, the smooth surface of the nightstand, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was waiting for something to go wrong. Maybe I was just waiting for the other shoe to drop. There had to be a catch. No one did this much for someone like me without expecting something in return. The kindness from Thomas felt foreign to me. I had spent my whole life taking what I could, never asking for more, and now I was being offered everything: food, shelter, clothes. But what did he want in return? I didn't know, and it scared me. I couldn't shake the fear that I would end up disappointing him, that somehow I would ruin this. I sat down on the bed, pulling my knees to my chest, trying to hold back the rising tide of emotions. It was too much. I couldn't process it. A gentle knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. "Come in," I said, trying to mask the tremor in my voice. The door creaked open, and Thomas stepped in, holding a small tray of food. "I thought you might be hungry," he said quietly, setting it down on the desk. "I know you've been through a lot." I looked up at him, unsure of what to say. My stomach rumbled, but I wasn't sure if I could eat. He didn't seem to mind my silence. "I just want you to know," he continued, his voice calm, "that you're not a burden here. You don't have to earn anything. You're safe. You don't have to prove yourself." His words hit me harder than I expected. No one had ever told me that before. No one had ever said that I didn't have to earn my keep, that I wasn't just a project for someone to fix. No one had ever said that I was enough, just as I was. I had to swallow the lump in my throat. I didn't know how to respond. I had never been told that I was allowed to be myself, without conditions. "Thank you," I said finally, my voice a little shaky. He smiled, a small, genuine smile that seemed to soften the edges of the room. "You're welcome," he said, then paused. "If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask." I nodded, unable to say more. Thomas left the room quietly, and I sat there for a long moment, staring at the food on the desk. I wasn't sure what I was feeling anymore. I wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that this wasn't just some temporary kindness, that he wasn't just helping me because he felt sorry for me. But I couldn't. I couldn't let myself believe that I was worth anything more than what I could do for others. And yet, here I was. It was hard to accept, harder still to understand. The days passed by in a blur of new routines. I spent my mornings getting to know the housekeeper, Carol, and the afternoons wandering the expansive gardens. Thomas would occasionally join me, offering a few words here and there. But for the most part, I kept to myself. I wasn't sure if I was trying to protect myself or if I just didn't know how to connect with someone like him. The space between us felt vast, as if the more he offered, the farther away I felt from him. But slowly, I began to realize something. As much as I tried to keep my distance, as much as I tried to hold on to my old ways of thinking, I couldn't ignore the small changes in myself. For the first time in my life, I was treated like I mattered. Not because of what I could do, not because of what I could give, but because I was me. And that was something I had never had before. One afternoon, as I was sitting on the patio, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I heard footsteps approaching. I turned to see Thomas walking toward me, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket. He stopped in front of me, looking down at me with a thoughtful expression. "I know it's been a lot to take in," he said, his voice quiet. "But I want you to know that you don't have to keep your distance. You're welcome here. You don't have to stay in your room all the time." I looked up at him, a little surprised. "I'm not used to this," I said softly. "I'm not used to being here." "I understand," he said, sitting down beside me. "It's hard to trust someone when all you've known is to keep to yourself. But you don't have to be afraid here." His words lingered in the air, and for the first time, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I didn't have to be afraid anymore. I didn't have to survive by myself. There was someone who saw me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. And maybe that was enough. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something I hadn't noticed before. Kindness, not just as an obligation, but as a real, honest offering. Thank you, I said quietly. He smiled again, his eyes softening. You're welcome, and I'm glad you're here. I woke up the next morning to the soft light streaming through the curtains, casting a golden glow across the room. For a moment, I just lay there, taking it all in. The comfort of the bed, the silence of the house, the strange sense of peace that had settled around me. It felt different from the life I had known, the life I had been running from for so long. I wasn't sure how to process it all, but for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel like I was constantly on guard. I had slept through the night without fear, without nightmares, and when I opened my eyes, the world outside was still waiting. I sat up slowly, taking in the room around me, the soft beige walls, the elegant furniture, the little details that made it feel like a home. It was nothing like the cramped spaces I had lived in, nothing like the cold, empty streets I had spent so many nights walking alone. I stood up and stretched, my body still adjusting to the luxury of having enough space. I walked over to the window and looked out at the sprawling gardens below. The sky was clear, the sun shining brightly, and for a moment, I felt like I could breathe again. I could feel the weight of everything I had left behind, the pain, the loss, the loneliness. But here, in this house, I felt like I could finally start over. I wasn't sure how or why Thomas had opened his home to me, but I was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, I deserved to be here. The thought scared me more than anything else. I had never been given a chance like this before. I wasn't used to kindness without strings attached. But as I stood there, looking out at the world, I realized that maybe I could be something more than just a survivor. I could learn to live, to thrive. I could be a person again, not just a girl struggling to make it through the day. My thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. I turned around to see Thomas standing in the doorway, holding a cup of coffee. Good morning, he said with a smile. I thought you might need this. I smiled back, a little shyly, and accepted the cup. Thank you, I said quietly. It felt strange to thank someone for something so simple, but it felt good too. I hope you slept well, he continued, stepping into the room. He didn't sit down, just leaned against the doorframe, watching me with a curious expression. I did, I replied, looking down at the coffee in my hands. Better than I have in a long time. He nodded, as if he understood. I'm glad, he said. There was a brief pause before he spoke again. I know this is all a lot to take in, but if you're ready, I'd like to help you get settled in. We can start by getting you enrolled in school, if that's something you want. I looked up at him, surprised by his words. School? I hadn't thought about school in so long. It seemed so distant, like a dream from another life. But the idea of going back, of having an opportunity to learn, to have a future, made something inside me stir. I hadn't even allowed myself to dream about it. I don't know if I'm ready for that, I said, my voice unsure. I don't even know where to start. Thomas's expression softened, and he stepped closer. That's okay. We can take it one step at a time. You don't have to decide everything right now. But you have options now. And you don't have to do it alone. The sincerity in his voice made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It wasn't just a fleeting thought or a distant wish anymore. It was something real. Maybe it wasn't too late to start over, to build something new. Maybe this was the beginning of something more than just surviving. Thank you, I said again, my voice a little firmer this time. I'll think about it. Thomas smiled and nodded, then turned to leave the room. Take your time, he said as he walked out. I sat down on the bed, holding the coffee cup in my hands, trying to process everything. School. A chance to learn. To have a future. I had never imagined such a thing for myself. It felt like a dream, but the longer I thought about it, the more it felt like something I could actually reach for. I wasn't sure how it would happen or what it would look like, but for the first time, I believed that maybe it was possible. Maybe I didn't have to keep living the way I had before, fighting just to survive, just to make it through another day. Maybe I could have more. As I finished the coffee and set the empty cup down on the nightstand, I realized something else. I wasn't just thankful for what Thomas had given me. I was thankful for what he had shown me. The possibility of something different, something better. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of reaching for it. I could do this. I didn't have to do it alone anymore. And maybe, just maybe, I was worthy of this chance. I spent the next few days adjusting to the strange new world I found myself in. The days were quiet, and despite the beauty and comfort of the mansion, I couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider. Every time I walked down the hallway, I was reminded of how much I had left behind. I wasn't sure where this path would take me, but I was starting to believe that it was better than where I had come from. The house felt like a dream, one I wasn't entirely sure I deserved, but one I was afraid to wake up from. I spent a lot of time with Carol, the housekeeper, who showed me how to keep my room clean, how to set the table, and, most importantly, how to begin to fit into this new life. But there was still a part of me that felt like I didn't belong. I wasn't used to being treated this way, like I mattered. It was strange, and I still didn't fully trust it. One afternoon, as I was walking through the garden, Thomas came out to meet me. He had been quieter lately, but there was something in the air today that felt different. He seemed determined, as though he had made up his mind about something. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice steady as he approached. "About what you said about school. I've made some calls." My heart skipped a beat. School. I had pushed the idea to the back of my mind, not wanting to get my hopes up, but hearing him mention it made it feel real. For a moment, I couldn't say anything. I was still processing the idea of even having the option to go to school, to have a chance at something different. "I know it's a big decision," Thomas continued, his gaze soft, "but I think it's time for you to make a choice. You don't have to decide everything today, but I want you to know that the option is there." I nodded, but my mind was racing. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to believe that I could go back to school and that this wasn't just some fantasy. But there was still a part of me that was scared. Scared of failing. Scared of being disappointed again. Thomas seemed to read my mind. "You don't have to be perfect," he said, his voice calm. "You just have to try, and you don't have to do it alone. I'm here to help you, every step of the way." His words felt like a weight lifted off my shoulders. For the first time, I realized that I didn't have to carry the burden of everything alone. Maybe, just maybe, I could give myself the chance to succeed. Maybe I didn't have to hide anymore. The next few days were a blur of activity. Thomas arranged for me to meet with a school counselor, someone who would help me figure out where I could start. The idea of going to school again was terrifying, but at the same time, it felt like the first real opportunity one had ever had. I spent hours reading, studying, and trying to catch up on everything I had missed. It wasn't easy. The knowledge felt foreign, like I had to teach myself everything all over again. But as I sat at the desk in my room, the books spread out before me, I realized that I wasn't just learning for school. I was learning for myself. I was learning to believe in something I hadn't believed in for so long, my own potential. Every day, I felt a little bit stronger, a little bit more capable. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. That evening, as I sat at the dining table with Thomas, I felt a sense of pride that I hadn't felt before. I had come a long way in such a short time, and I was beginning to believe that this life, this chance, was something I deserved. Thomas looked at me across the table, his expression thoughtful. "I'm proud of you," he said, his words simple but filled with meaning. "You've come so far in such a short time." I smiled, but I didn't know how to respond. I wasn't used to being praised, especially not for something I hadn't earned. But for the first time, I realized that I wasn't just doing this for him, for anyone else. I was doing it for me. I had spent so many years fighting for survival that I had forgotten what it meant to live. But now, with each passing day, I was rediscovering it. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in my life, I was excited to find out. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. And as I looked up at Thomas, I realized that this feeling of safety, of hope, was worth more than anything I could have imagined. I had a chance now, a real chance, and I wasn't going to waste it. The journey ahead would be difficult, but I wasn't alone anymore. And that, more than anything, made all the difference. I had spent weeks adjusting to my new life in the mansion, and with every passing day, I felt more and more like I could be someone different. The fear that had always followed me, the fear of being exposed, the fear that someone might see me for what I really was, just a girl trying to survive, began to fade. But I wasn't fooling myself. I knew that this life, as perfect as it seemed, had its own set of rules, its own set of expectations. And I didn't know if I could meet them. I was still trying to find my place, still figuring out how to balance this life of luxury with the survival instincts I had developed over the years. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick. I knew it would take time, but I was determined to try. One evening, after finishing my homework, yes, homework, I went for a walk in the garden. It had become my routine, the quiet time to think, to process everything that had happened. As I walked, the cool night air brushing against my face, I found myself thinking about the past, about my grandmother, about the life I had left behind, about the streets. I wasn't sure if I missed them. I wasn't sure if I missed the struggle or the way I had lived, but I knew it had been my life for so long that it felt impossible to let go. But this place, this new life, was pulling me in. It was like a gentle tide, and no matter how much I fought, it was sweeping me further into its current. And I didn't know if that was a good thing. But I had to try. I had to believe that maybe this was a chance for something better. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind me. I turned around to see Thomas walking toward me, his hands in his pockets. His face as unreadable as usual. But there was something different about him tonight. Something in his eyes. "I thought I might find you out here," he said, his voice softer than usual. I nodded. "I like the garden," I said, my voice uncertain. "It's peaceful." "It is," he agreed, stopping beside me. We stood there for a moment, just looking out at the moonlit path ahead of us. Finally, he spoke again. "I've been thinking," he said, his tone serious. "I've made some calls, and I think it's time we talk about the next step." My heart skipped a beat. I had been expecting this, or something like it. I had been waiting for the conversation to come, but I wasn't ready for it. I wasn't sure I was ready for anything. "The next step?" I asked, my voice tight. "What do you mean?" He looked at me, his gaze steady, his expression calm. "I think it's time we talked about what you want to do with your future. School is just the beginning. There are opportunities, real ones, waiting for you." I swallowed, feeling the weight of his words. I had always been told that my future was something I had to fight for. I had never been given a choice, never been asked what I wanted. I had just been told to survive. But Thomas was asking me something different. "I don't know," I said quietly. "I don't even know where to start." He stepped closer, his eyes softening. "That's okay. We don't have to have all the answers right now. But I want you to know that I'm here for you, and I believe in you. You've already come so far." His words meant more to me than I could say. They weren't just words of encouragement. They were a promise. A promise that he was invested in my future, that he wasn't just offering me shelter and food, but the chance to be something more, to be someone more. "What if I fail?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What if I'm not good enough?" He shook his head, his expression firm. "Failure is part of the process. What matters is that you keep going. No one gets everything right on the first try, but you have the strength to keep trying. And that's what matters." I felt a lump form in my throat, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. His belief in me, his confidence, was something I had never experienced. I had always believed that the only person I could count on was myself. But here, with him, I was learning that maybe it wasn't true. Maybe, for once, I didn't have to do everything alone. Maybe it was okay to lean on someone. "Thank you," I said, the words soft but genuine. He smiled, the warmth in his eyes easing the tension in my chest. "You don't have to thank me. Just take your time. We'll figure this out together." And in that moment, I realized that this was the first time in my life that I wasn't alone, that I didn't have to carry the weight of the world on my shoulders by myself. And that, more than anything else, was what made all the difference. We stood there for a few moments, side by side, the silence between us comfortable now. For the first time, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. I didn't feel like I had to fight for everything. I just had to take the next step. And maybe, just maybe, I was ready to do that. I had spent weeks adjusting to my new life, but as the days passed, the reality of what was happening began to feel more and more surreal. I had never imagined a life like this, one where I could actually feel safe, feel like I belonged, like I had a future. It was overwhelming, and despite the warmth of the mansion, there was still something deep inside me that couldn't let go of the life I had left behind. It wasn't easy to leave behind the harshness of the streets, even if I no longer had to fight for survival every day. Thomas had made it clear that I didn't have to prove myself to him, that he wanted to help me, but part of me still struggled with that. Part of me still wanted to earn my place, to show him that I was worth his kindness. It wasn't something I could turn off just because someone else believed in me. I was still trying to get used to the idea of being given things without having to work for them. As I stood in the garden one evening, looking at the setting sun, I couldn't help but feel a pang of doubt. It was silly, really. I was in a beautiful house with everything I could possibly need, and yet there was this nagging voice in my head telling me that I wasn't worthy of it. I shook my head, trying to shake off the thought. I had come so far, and I couldn't let my insecurities drag me back. The door to the garden opened, and I turned to see Thomas stepping outside. He had been quieter lately, and I could tell that something was on his mind. He walked up to me, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket, his gaze focused on the horizon. "I thought I'd find you out here," he said, his voice soft but steady. "I've been thinking about what you said the other day. About school. I've made some calls." My heart skipped a beat. School. I had almost forgotten about it, lost in the comfort of the mansion and the strange new world I found myself in. But the thought of going back to school, of actually having a chance to learn and grow, filled me with a mixture of excitement and fear. "School?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Are you sure about that?" "I mean, I'm not exactly." I trailed off, unsure of how to finish the sentence. "You're exactly what I need you to be," he said, cutting me off gently. "You don't have to be anything other than yourself. You've already come so far. This is just the next step." He looked at me then, his eyes soft but filled with certainty. I wanted to believe him, more than anything, but I wasn't sure if I was ready. I wasn't sure if I could go from being someone who barely made it through each day to someone who had a future ahead of her. The idea of it scared me. "I don't know if I can do it," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. "I don't know if I can fit in. I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of life." Thomas stepped closer, his expression gentle but firm. "You don't have to fit in. You just have to take one step at a time. The rest will come. And you don't have to do it alone. I'm here to help you." His words were like a lifeline, and for a moment, I let myself believe them. I let myself believe that maybe I didn't have to be afraid anymore. Maybe, just maybe, I could take that next step. "You really think I can do this?" I asked, my voice shaky. "I do," he said, his smile small but sincere. "And I'm proud of you. I've seen how much you've grown since you got here. You've already proven that you have the strength to make it." I felt a rush of emotions at his words, gratitude, fear, hope. They all mixed together inside me, and I didn't know what to do with them. I wasn't used to people being proud of me. I wasn't used to being given opportunities without having to fight for them. It felt like something I didn't deserve, but at the same time, it felt like the one thing I had always needed. "Okay," I said, my voice steadying. "I'll try." Thomas nodded, his eyes lighting up with approval. "That's all I ask. Just take the next step, and we'll figure the rest out as we go." I smiled, feeling the weight of his words settle in my chest. It wasn't going to be easy, I knew that. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I had a chance. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. And maybe, just maybe, I could build a future for myself after all. The next day, Thomas arranged for me to meet with a counselor at a nearby school. It was a small step, but it was a step, and that was all I needed. As I sat in the counselor's office, listening to her explain the process of re-entering school, I couldn't help but feel a little nervous. But when she looked at me with a warm smile and said, "You're going to do great," I felt a spark of hope that I hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe I wasn't ready, but maybe it didn't matter. Maybe I just needed to try. As I left the office, Thomas was waiting for me outside. He looked at me with a proud smile as I walked toward him. "How did it go?" he asked, his voice full of anticipation. "It was good," I said, my voice quieter than usual. "I think I'm ready to give it a try." Thomas's smile widened. "I knew you would be. You've got this." And for the first time, I believed him. I walked into the school building, my heart beating faster with every step. It was the first time I had been in a school in years, and the reality of it hit me all at once. The walls were covered with bright posters, the sound of students chatting filled the air, and the buzz of activity was overwhelming. I could feel the weight of every step, every movement, like the whole world was watching me. But no one seemed to notice me as I walked through the hallways, my shoes tapping quietly on the linoleum floors. My mind raced. What was I doing here? Could I really fit in? What if I wasn't smart enough? What if everyone saw me as a fraud? The self-doubt crept in, and I felt like I was about to turn around and walk right out of the building. But I didn't. I took a deep breath and kept walking. I was here, and this was my chance. I had promised myself I would give it a try. As I made my way to the counselor's office, I could feel the weight of my past pulling at me. The memories of the streets, of living day by day, of never knowing what tomorrow would bring, were still fresh in my mind. But this was different. This was something new, something that felt almost too good to be true. I reached the office door and knocked softly. The door opened, and the counselor, a woman in her 30s with a warm smile, greeted me. "You must be the new student," she said, her voice friendly and reassuring. "I'm Mrs. Thompson. Come on in. Let's talk about how we can get you started." I stepped inside, feeling a little more at ease as she guided me to a chair. The office was cozy, with stacks of books and papers neatly organized on shelves. There was a window behind her desk that looked out at the playground, the sun shining brightly in the distance. For a moment, I forgot about all my worries. "So, tell me a little about yourself," Mrs. Thompson said, sitting across from me. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say. I wasn't used to talking about myself, not like this. I haven't been to school in a while." I started, my voice quiet. "But I really want to try. I want to be better, I guess." Mrs. Thompson nodded, her expression encouraging. "That's a great start. Everyone here is rooting for you, and we'll work together to make sure you get the support you need." She handed me a packet with information about classes and activities. As I looked over it, I could feel the weight of it all, being part of a school, of a community. It felt like stepping into a completely new world. A world where I wasn't just a survivor, but a student with a future. The idea was terrifying, but it was also exciting. I had never imagined a future for myself before. I had always been focused on the here and now, on making it through another day. But now it was different. I had the chance to think beyond the next meal or the next night on the streets. I had a chance to build something. Mrs. Thompson continued explaining the process of enrollment, the classes I could take, the extracurricular activities I could join. It was overwhelming, but in a way that felt good. It was a chance to shape my own future, to make choices, to decide what kind of person I wanted to become. "You don't have to make any decisions today," Mrs. Thompson said as the meeting came to an end. "Just take your time. We're here to help." As I left the office, I felt a mixture of emotions. Part of me wanted to run, to go back to what I knew, to the streets where I had always been in control, where I knew how to survive. But another part of me, a part one hadn't known existed until recently, wanted to stay, to be part of this world, to have a future. I walked back down the hallways, my mind racing with all the possibilities. It felt like the weight of my past was still there, but it was getting lighter with each step. For the first time, I felt like I had a choice. I could choose what happened next. I could choose what kind of life I wanted to build. That thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. When I met Thomas later that day, I could see the expectation in his eyes. "How did it go?" he asked, his voice soft. "It went well," I said, my voice steady. "I'm going to give it a try." His face lit up with a smile that made my chest tighten. "I knew you would," he said, his voice full of pride. "You've got this. I'm proud of you." His words made my heart swell, and for the first time in my life, I believed him. I wasn't just doing this for him. I was doing it for me. I was choosing a future, and I wasn't going to let fear hold me back. The next step wasn't going to be easy, but it was a step forward. And for the first time, I was ready to take it. I woke up the next morning with a sense of quiet anticipation. The weight of the decision I had made the day before still hung over me. But now there was something new, a feeling of resolve. I was going to do this. I was going to make the most of the opportunity in front of me, even if it scared me. The day stretched out ahead of me with endless possibilities, and for the first time in my life, I was starting to believe that I could shape my own future. As I got ready for the day, I couldn't help but notice how different everything felt. The room I had been sleeping in had become mine, not just a temporary place to stay, but a space I could call my own. The familiar discomfort of uncertainty had given way to something else, hope. I hadn't felt that in years. I walked downstairs to find Thomas already in the kitchen, sipping his coffee as he scanned through some papers. He looked up when he saw me enter. "Good morning," he said with a smile. "Ready for your first day?" I nodded, though a part of me was still unsure. "I guess I am," I replied, my voice quiet but determined. "You're going to do great," he said, his voice full of encouragement. "Just remember to take it one step at a time. You don't have to rush. You're here to learn, not to be perfect." His words were exactly what I needed to hear. It wasn't about being perfect, it was about trying, about learning, about growing. I wasn't sure if I would be able to do everything I wanted to do, but I knew I would try my best. After a quick breakfast, I headed out with Thomas. He was taking me to school, but this time, I felt a little more at ease. The nerves hadn't completely disappeared, but they weren't as sharp as they had been the day before. We drove in silence for a while, the sound of the car's tires on the road and the soft hum of the engine filling the space between us. I looked out the window at the passing scenery, my thoughts drifting to the life I had left behind and the new one I was trying to build. It wasn't easy to let go of the past. I still thought about my grandmother, about the struggles we had faced together, about the nights I had spent alone on the streets. But I also knew that I couldn't stay in the past forever. I had to move forward, to embrace the future. When we arrived at the school, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The building was large and imposing, its brick walls towering over me like something out of a dream. I wasn't used to being in a place like this. It felt like stepping into a different world. Thomas turned to me, his expression reassuring. "You don't have to do this alone," he said. "I'll be right here with you, every step of the way." I nodded, taking a deep breath as we walked toward the entrance. My heart pounded in my chest, and for a moment, I was sure everyone would see how out of place I felt. I was just a girl who had barely survived the streets. What could I possibly have in common with the kids who went to school here? But as I stepped inside, something unexpected happened. A girl about my age smiled at me from across the hallway. She had bright, friendly eyes and a warm smile, and I couldn't help but feel a little less alone. "Hey, you must be the new girl," she said, walking over to me. "I'm Lucy. Welcome to the school." I smiled back, feeling a little bit of the tension in my chest ease. "Thanks," I said, my voice a little shaky. "I'm just trying to figure everything out." "Don't worry," she said with a laugh. "We've all been there. If you need help with anything, just let me know. I know the ropes around here." Her kindness made me feel a little more at ease, and as we walked through the halls together, I began to feel a bit more confident. The students I passed didn't seem to notice me as anything other than another new face, and that was a relief. I didn't need to stand out. I just needed to fit in, to be part of something. As we walked to the classroom, Lucy explained a few things about the school, about the different teachers and the classes. It felt good to have someone guide me through it, to show me the ropes. When we finally reached my homeroom, Lucy gave me a quick wave before heading to her own class. I stood in front of the door for a moment, taking a deep breath before stepping inside. The room was filled with students chatting and laughing, and for a second, I felt a flash of panic. But then, the teacher looked up and smiled at me. "You must be the new student," she said warmly. "Welcome. I'm Mrs. Harper. Don't be shy, come on in." I smiled back and walked to the empty desk she pointed to, sitting down slowly. As the class settled in, I felt the weight of the moment hit me. I was here. I was really here. I wasn't on the streets anymore. I wasn't alone. I had a future, a chance to make something of myself. It wasn't going to be easy, and I knew there would be challenges ahead, but I was ready to face them. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a purpose. I was going to make the most of this chance, to prove to myself and to everyone else that I was more than just the girl who had come from nothing. I was going to show them who I could be. I walked through the school halls in a haze of new experiences, trying to absorb everything while keeping my head down. Every day was a whirlwind of unfamiliar faces, new lessons, and the overwhelming feeling that I was still trying to catch up. Despite the warmth I had found with Thomas and the safety of the mansion, there were moments when the weight of my past seemed too heavy to bear. Every now and then, a flash of memory would hit me, reminding me of the streets, of the life I had lived, and I would feel like an outsider again. But as the days turned into weeks, something unexpected started to happen. I began to see the possibility of a future. And with that future came a sense of responsibility. I wasn't just living for survival anymore. I was living for something greater. It was one Tuesday morning when things began to shift. I was sitting in my third period class, trying to focus on the teacher's lecture about literature, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I slipped it out discreetly, only to see a text from Thomas. "We need to talk when you get home." The message was brief, but something about it unsettled me. I couldn't help but feel a slight pang of anxiety. What could he possibly want to talk about? Had something gone wrong? Maybe I had misunderstood the rules, or maybe he was going to tell me that this life, this chance, wasn't meant for me. I shook the thought from my head. I had to stop letting my fears get the best of me. I took a deep breath and focused on the lesson, though my mind kept drifting back to the message. When school ended that day, I made my way home with a familiar knot in my stomach. I was so used to fighting for survival that any hint of uncertainty felt like a threat. But when I walked through the door of the mansion, I found Thomas in the living room, waiting for me, his expression neutral but thoughtful. He motioned for me to sit down. I hesitated for a moment before sitting across from him. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's nothing to be alarmed about," Thomas replied, his tone calm but serious. "I've been hearing some things, and I need to be sure we're on the same page about your future here." My heart skipped a beat. Hearing some things? What did that mean? My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe someone had found out about my past. Maybe someone was questioning my place in the mansion. I opened my mouth to ask, but Thomas held up a hand, as if reading my thoughts. "It's not about you personally," he said quickly. "But there are people who are starting to ask questions. You've been doing great in school, and everyone here is rooting for you. But I want you to understand something." I frowned, unsure of what he was getting at. "What do you mean? What kind of questions?" He leaned forward slightly, his gaze serious. "Some people outside this house, might not understand why I'm helping you the way I am. They might think I'm doing it out of pity, or for some other reason. And I need you to be prepared for that. I want you to understand that you're here because you deserve to be, not because you need to prove anything to anyone else." I blinked, surprised by the sudden weight of his words. I hadn't thought about that before. I hadn't considered that people might not understand why I was living here, why Thomas had taken me in. It had never really crossed my mind. I had been so focused on adjusting to my new life that I hadn't stopped to think about the outside world and how they might see me. "What do you want me to do?" I asked quietly, still processing what he was saying. Thomas paused for a moment, then looked at me with a soft but firm expression. "I want you to be yourself," he said. "And if anyone questions you or makes you feel less than, I want you to know that it doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is your growth. You're not here because of pity. You're here because you have the potential to do great things. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." His words hit me harder than I expected. I had been so focused on surviving and making it through the day that I hadn't considered the bigger picture. But hearing him say that made me realize something I hadn't fully understood until now. I had a right to be here. I wasn't just taking up space. I was a person with a future that was worth fighting for. "I'll try," I said softly, my voice full of emotion. "I'll try to be strong. I won't let them make me feel like I don't belong." Thomas nodded, his face softening. "I know you will. I'm proud of you, you know." I looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his words. I wasn't used to hearing that, especially not from someone like him. It made me feel like I could do anything, like I could take on the world if I wanted to. "Thank you," I whispered, my throat tightening. He smiled and stood up, his posture relaxed now. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "Just keep going. You're doing great." I watched him leave the room, my heart pounding in my chest. What had just happened? Why had it felt like such a pivotal moment? I didn't know for sure, but I felt a shift inside me. A weight had been lifted. Maybe it was the weight of my doubts, or maybe it was the weight of my fear, but something had changed. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I wasn't just waiting for the next disaster to strike. I was living. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to face whatever came next. I had spent weeks at the mansion, settling into a new routine, but as the days went by, I started to notice something unsettling. There were moments, especially when I was alone, when I felt the weight of my past more than ever. It wasn't just the memories of the streets or the uncertainty I had lived with for so long. It was the realization that, despite everything I had been given, there were still pieces of me that didn't quite fit into this world. It was hard to shake the feeling that I wasn't meant to be here, that maybe this was all just too good to be true. But every time I doubted myself, Thomas would remind me that I belonged. He didn't just give me a place to stay, he gave me hope. The past few days had been filled with small victories. I had managed to keep up with my schoolwork, even though I felt like I was playing catch-up. The other students had been kind to me, but I still felt like an outsider. I didn't belong in their world, not fully. But Thomas was determined to help me see that I did. It was one afternoon after school when the first real test came. I was sitting in the common room, reading over some notes when the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but curiosity got the best of me. I picked it up. "Hello," I said, my voice shaky. "Hello, is this the girl staying with Thomas Carlyle?" A voice on the other end asked. "Yes," I replied, confused. "Who's this?" "This is Mrs. Lancaster. I'm calling from the..." School. We need to talk about your enrollment. The voice said, its tone suddenly more businesslike. My heart skipped a beat. Why were they calling me? Had I done something wrong? What about my enrollment? I asked, my throat dry. There was a pause before Mrs. Lancaster spoke again. We've been hearing some concerns about your background, she said. Some of the other students' families are asking questions about why you're here. They're worried about the kind of influence you might have on their children. My stomach churned. I had known this might happen, but hearing it out loud made it real. It wasn't just the school that was questioning me. It was the world outside the mansion. I wasn't just a student. I was an outsider, and that was something I couldn't escape. I'm not a problem, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm here to learn. I don't want trouble. Mrs. Lancaster's voice softened slightly. I understand, but we have to consider the concerns of the other families. We want to be sure this is the right fit for everyone. I think it would be best if we meet in person to discuss things further. I felt my heart race. This was it. The test I had been dreading. I wasn't sure if I was ready, but I knew I had to face it. I'll be there, I said, swallowing hard. When do you want to meet? How about tomorrow at noon, she suggested. We'll meet in my office. I agreed, my mind already racing with all the worst-case scenarios. What if they didn't want me there anymore? What if I was asked to leave? I hung up the phone, feeling a knot form in my stomach. I didn't want to disappoint Thomas. I didn't want to let him down. He had done so much for me, and now, it felt like the world was testing whether I was worth it. The next day, I arrived at the school early, my nerves making it difficult to breathe. I walked through the halls, trying to ignore the whispers I could feel but couldn't hear. I hadn't realized how much I had come to rely on Thomas's presence in my life. But today, I was alone in the face of everything I had feared. I found Mrs. Lancaster's office, took a deep breath, and knocked on the door. She opened it with a polite smile, but I could see the hesitation in her eyes. Come in, she said, stepping aside. I walked in, my hands clammy, and took a seat across from her desk. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I could feel the tension in the air, and it was hard to sit still. Finally, Mrs. Lancaster cleared her throat. I'm glad you came, she said, folding her hands in front of her. I want to make sure you understand why we need to have this conversation. There are a lot of concerns from other families, and it's important that we address them. I nodded, trying to keep my composure. I understand, I said quietly. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want to learn. Mrs. Lancaster studied me for a moment before speaking again. I believe you, she said, her voice softer now. But there are others who aren't so sure. They're worried about your background, about where you come from. They don't know you like I do, and they don't understand why you're here. I looked down at my hands, trying to steady myself. I had always known that my past would follow me, that I couldn't escape it. But hearing someone else acknowledge it out loud made it harder to ignore. I don't want to hurt anyone, I said, my voice shaking a little. I just want a chance. I want to be better than what I was. Mrs. Lancaster looked at me for a long moment, and then something changed in her expression. She leaned forward, her tone softening even more. I can see that, and I think we need to give you that chance. I looked up at her, surprised. You do? She nodded. Yes. I think you've proven that you deserve to be here. It won't be easy, but I believe you can do it. And I'll support you, as long as you're willing to put in the effort. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. A weight seemed to lift from my chest, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something better. Thank you, I said, my voice full of relief. I won't let you down. Mrs. Lancaster smiled at me. I know you won't. Now, let's focus on making sure you succeed here. You have a future, and it's up to you to make the most of it. I left her office feeling lighter than I had in days. The uncertainty wasn't gone, but it no longer felt as heavy. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, I was ready to find out. I woke up the next morning feeling a strange mix of nerves and excitement. I had passed the first hurdle with Mrs. Lancaster, but there was still so much ahead of me. The other students, the teachers, the fear of not belonging. It was all still there, just beneath the surface. But today, something felt different. Today, I felt like I was ready to face whatever came next. I got dressed slowly, my hands a little shaky as I pulled on the uniform I had been given, a reminder that I was no longer just a girl on the streets. I was a student, part of a world I had never imagined being a part of. When I came downstairs, Thomas was sitting at the kitchen table, reading the paper. He looked up as I entered, a smile on his face that made the nervousness in my chest ease just a little. "Good morning," he said, his voice warm. "How are you feeling?" "Nervous," I admitted, my voice quieter than usual. "But I think I'm ready." Thomas nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You've got this. Just remember, it's okay to take it one step at a time." I nodded back, trying to push the nerves away. I had to believe him. I couldn't let fear control me anymore. The ride to school was quiet, the streets of the city passing by in a blur. As we pulled into the school parking lot, I felt the familiar knot tighten in my stomach. It was bigger today, though, not because of the usual anxiety, but because I knew that today was the day I would truly have to stand on my own. I wasn't sure if I was ready, but I knew I couldn't turn back. Thomas parked the car, and I sat there for a moment, staring at the school ahead of me. The building seemed so massive, like it could swallow me whole. But then I looked at Thomas, and I saw that same look of encouragement in his eyes. "You don't have to do this alone," he said, his voice low and steady. "I'm proud of you no matter what." I took a deep breath and nodded. "Thanks," I whispered. I opened the door, stepping out into the parking lot. My feet felt heavier than usual, as though the weight of what I was about to do was pressing down on me. But I walked toward the entrance, my steps steady. When I reached the front door of the school, I hesitated for just a moment, feeling a flash of doubt. But then I pushed it aside. This was it. I was here. The door opened, and I stepped inside. The noise of the school hit me instantly, the chatter of students, the sounds of lockers slamming shut, the bell ringing. It was overwhelming, but at the same time, it felt like I was stepping into something new, something that could change everything. As I walked down the hall toward my first class, I saw the faces of students who didn't look at me like I was different, who didn't judge me. They were just going about their day, focused on their own lives, just like I was now. I took a seat in the classroom, my heart racing as I looked around. The students around me didn't seem to notice me, and I was grateful for that. I didn't want to stand out. I just wanted to be a part of something. The teacher walked in, a middle-aged man with glasses and a warm smile, and immediately started the lesson. I tried to focus, but my mind kept wandering. I kept wondering if this was really my life now. Was this real? Was I really sitting in a classroom, a part of something bigger? The bell rang, signaling the end of the class, and I stood up, feeling like I had just passed through some kind of test. I had done it. I had survived the first class, the first day, and no one had looked at me like I didn't belong. I was still here. I was still a part of this world. As I left the classroom and made my way to the next, I saw Lucy again. She smiled at me from across the hall and waved. I smiled back, grateful for her kindness. "How was it?" she asked when I reached her. "It was good," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "I think I'm going to be okay." "Of course you will," she said, giving me a reassuring hug. "You've got this." As I walked to my next class, I couldn't help but feel a small sense of pride. Maybe I wasn't meant to fit into this world perfectly. Maybe I was always going to be a little different. But that was okay. I didn't need to be the same as everyone else. I just needed to keep moving forward, one step at a time. And with each step, I was proving to myself that I was more than the girl I had been. I was becoming something new, something better. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a place. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. The day went by in a blur of new faces and new experiences. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I wanted to run, to escape back to the comfort of the life I knew, the one where everything was uncertain and where I had to fight for every inch. But I didn't run. I stayed. I made it through the day. And when I came home that evening, Thomas was waiting for me. "How was it?" he asked, his eyes full of curiosity. "It was good," I said, a smile tugging at my lips. "I think I'm really starting to believe that I can do this." Thomas smiled back, his pride in me clear in his eyes. "I never doubted you," he said softly. And for the first time, I realized that maybe, just maybe, he was right. I woke up the next morning to a sense of dread hanging in the air. It wasn't the typical kind of dread I had felt before, the kind that came with worrying about where my next meal would come from or if I'd have a place to sleep that night. No, this was different. This was the kind of dread that came with knowing something big was coming, something I had no control over. It had been weeks since the conversation with Mrs. Lancaster, and everything had been going smoothly. But as much as I had hoped to put my past behind me, I knew that sooner or later it would catch up with me. It wasn't just the people at school who might question me anymore. It was the world outside the mansion, the world where I came from, that was starting to notice. I had heard whispers in the hallways, quiet conversations between students and teachers. There were questions about me, about why I was here, about my past. And that fear, the fear of being rejected, was starting to eat away at me. I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't. It was as if every step forward I took was weighed down by the baggage of my past. As I walked downstairs that morning, I found Thomas sitting at the kitchen table, reading the newspaper. He looked up when he saw me, offering his usual warm smile. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "How did you sleep?" "I'm fine," I replied, though I could feel the tension in my chest. He studied me for a moment, his gaze sharp as if he could sense my unease. "What's going on?" he asked gently. I hesitated, unsure of how to voice the fear that had been building inside me. "I'm not sure how much longer I can keep pretending that everything is fine," I said quietly. "People are starting to notice me. They're asking questions." Thomas put down the newspaper, his expression softening. He stood up and walked over to where I was standing. "What kind of questions?" he asked, his voice steady. "About my background. About why I'm here," I replied, feeling a lump form in my throat. "I know I don't belong here, not really. I don't fit in with these people." "You do belong here," he said firmly. "And you're not alone. But I understand your concern. Things are changing, and with that comes uncertainty." I nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and fear. Part of me wanted to believe him, but the other part was terrified that I would be exposed, that I wouldn't be able to handle the pressure. "What if I fail?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What if they decide I'm not good enough to be here?" Thomas stepped closer, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. "You won't fail," he said, his voice full of confidence. "You have come so far already. It's not about being perfect. It's about being who you are and embracing the opportunity to grow. This is your chance to prove to yourself, not to anyone else, that you're capable." I took a deep breath, trying to calm the racing thoughts in my mind. "I don't know if I can do it," I said, my voice small. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." He smiled, his eyes full of understanding. "You don't have to do it alone," he said. "I'm here to support you. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. Just take it one step at a time. You have already shown more strength than you realize." His words were like a lifeline, pulling me back from the edge of my doubts. I wasn't sure if I believed him completely, but in that moment, I wanted to. I wanted to trust that I could make it through whatever came next. The weight of my fears still lingered, but Thomas's presence gave me the courage to keep moving forward. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I went through my classes, trying my best to focus on the lessons, but my mind kept drifting back to the conversation with Thomas. The questions from the other students. The whispers. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being judged, that everything I did would be scrutinized. At lunch, I sat alone at a table in the cafeteria, trying to avoid the stares I felt burning into me from across the room. It wasn't like anyone was overtly mean or rude, but I could sense the curiosity in the air. I wasn't sure if I could handle being the center of attention, but I also wasn't sure how to avoid it. As I ate my lunch, I tried to remind myself that I wasn't just a product of my past. I was more than that. I was a person with dreams, with goals, with the potential to create a future for myself. But the fear of being exposed, of having my past come crashing into my present, was a constant shadow. That afternoon, I had another meeting with Mrs. Lancaster. I had been trying to push the thoughts of what might happen out of my mind, but the anxiety was eating at me. I couldn't avoid the truth. The world outside this mansion was watching, and I didn't know how much longer I could keep up the facade. When I arrived at her office, I found her sitting at her desk, going over some paperwork. She looked up when I entered, her expression kind but businesslike. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her voice gentle. "It's been a lot to take in," I admitted, sitting down across from her. "I'm just worried about what's going to happen next." Mrs. Lancaster leaned back in her chair, studying me carefully. "You've made a lot of progress, and I want you to know that we're committed to helping you succeed here. But I understand that this isn't easy, especially with the rumors circulating. It's something we'll have to address head-on." My heart sank. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice tight. "I don't want to be a problem," I added quickly. She smiled at me, her eyes warm and reassuring. "You're not a problem," she said. "But we need to make sure that everyone understands the importance of your place here. You deserve to be here, and we're going to make sure that message is clear." I nodded slowly, still feeling uncertain but a little less afraid. Mrs. Lancaster's confidence gave me a glimmer of hope. Maybe I could do this. Maybe, despite everything, I was finally on the right path. When I left her office, I still wasn't sure what would happen next, but for the first time in days, I felt like I wasn't alone. And that, more than anything, was the strength I needed to keep moving forward. I spent the following days feeling like I was caught in a whirlwind. On one hand, I was finally beginning to feel like I belonged in this new life. But on the other hand, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I was being tested every step of the way. Every time I stepped into a new classroom, I felt the weight of eyes on me. I tried not to look around too much, to avoid catching anyone's gaze, but I couldn't help it. It wasn't just the students, it was the adults too. Teachers, the principal, the staff, they were all watching, sizing me up, wondering why I was there. It was subtle at first, just little things, like the way they would glance at me before quickly looking away. But it was enough to make me question everything. Was I really meant to be here? Or was I just a temporary project that Thomas was trying to fix? That morning, I walked into school with the same knot in my stomach. I had become accustomed to the feeling of walking into a room full of strangers, but today it was different. There was an edge to it now, something more palpable. I could feel the stares even before I stepped into the classroom. The whispers, the glances, they were harder to ignore. I sat down at my usual desk, trying to keep my head down. The teacher, Mr. Mitchell, began the lesson, but my mind was elsewhere. I kept thinking about all the ways I didn't belong. How was I supposed to fit into this world when it felt like everyone was already judging me? When the bell rang for the end of the class, I packed my things slowly, trying to avoid the looks I knew I was getting. As I walked out into the hallway, I saw a group of students standing near their lockers, talking quietly. I recognized some of them from my classes, but I had never really spoken to them. They were all chatting among themselves, but as I passed, I couldn't help but overhear bits of their conversation. "She doesn't belong here," one of them said, and my heart sank. "She's just here because of Carlisle, right? I don't get it." I tried to ignore it, but the words hit me like a punch to the stomach. She doesn't belong here. Those words echoed in my mind as I walked away, my hands clenched tightly around my books. I wanted to stop, to turn around and tell them that I did belong here, that I wasn't just some project or charity case. But I didn't. I couldn't. It hurt too much. The next class felt like an eternity. I could barely focus on the lesson. I kept replaying those words in my head. She doesn't belong here. It wasn't just the students. I felt it in the air, like everyone was waiting for me to fail. After class, I walked to the bathroom, needing a moment to myself. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, trying to steady my breath. "You can do this," I told myself. "You've already come this far." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure if I believed it. I had spent so much of my life fighting just to survive. I had never been given a chance like this before, and I didn't know how to handle it. I had no idea how to prove that I belonged. As I stared at myself in the mirror, trying to summon the strength I knew I needed, the bathroom door opened. I looked up to see Lucy standing there, her usual bright smile on her face. "Hey, you okay?" she asked, walking over to me. I didn't say anything at first, just looked down at the floor, trying to blink away the tears threatening to spill. "I'm fine," I finally said, my voice shaking. I don't know if I can do this." She didn't say anything for a moment, just stood there beside me, waiting. "You know," she said softly, "everyone feels like they don't belong sometimes. It's not just you." I looked up at her, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you're not the only one who's felt like this. Everyone has something they're struggling with. It's not about fitting in. It's about finding your place, at your own pace. It doesn't matter what other people think." I didn't know what to say. She was right. I had spent so much time worrying about what other people thought of me, I hadn't stopped to think about what I wanted for myself. "Thanks," I said, my voice a little steadier. Lucy smiled. "Anytime." I walked out of the bathroom with her, feeling a little lighter. Maybe it was because of her words, or maybe it was just the fact that someone had seen me, really seen me. But for the first time that day, I didn't feel quite so alone. When I got home that afternoon, Thomas was in the living room, as usual. He looked up from his book when I entered, his eyes searching mine for any sign of how my day had gone. "How was school?" he asked, his voice calm but full of care. I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure what to say. How could I explain the mix of emotions I was feeling? The hurt, the frustration, the uncertainty. Finally, I sat down on the couch next to him. It was harder than I thought, I admitted. People are saying things about me. They don't think I belong here. Thomas listened quietly, not interrupting. And what do you think? He asked after a long moment. I don't know, I said softly. Sometimes I feel like they're right. Like I don't belong. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. You belong here because you've earned your place. Not because of anyone else, but because of you. What people say, what they think, it doesn't define who you are. His words settled over me like a balm. I had been so caught up in the fear of rejection that I hadn't stopped to think about how far I had come. I wasn't here because of Thomas's kindness alone. I was here because I had worked hard to get here, because I was willing to fight for a chance at something more. I don't want to disappoint you, I said quietly, my voice filled with emotion. You won't, he said firmly, his hand resting on my shoulder. You've already proven you won't. I let out a breath, feeling the weight of the day lift off my shoulders. It wasn't going to be easy, but I was starting to believe that maybe I could do this. Maybe I did belong here, after all. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I was learning to walk it, one step at a time. And for the first time, that was enough. I had spent weeks adjusting to my new life, and things had started to settle into a rhythm. School, despite its challenges, had become something I could navigate, and the mansion no longer felt like an alien world. But even with all the progress, there was still that lingering sense of fear, the fear that at any moment, something might happen to shatter this fragile reality I had built. It was a sunny Saturday when everything changed. I had just finished my homework and was sitting in the garden, enjoying the warmth of the sun on my face when I heard a car pull into the driveway. I didn't think much of it at first. Thomas had mentioned something about a business meeting, but then I saw the familiar black SUV pull up, the one that always belonged to a visitor. I stood up, brushing the dirt off my jeans, when the door opened and a man stepped out. He was tall, dressed in a sharp suit, and he moved with a sense of purpose that made me instinctively take a step back. Something about him made my stomach tighten. It wasn't just his presence, it was the way he looked around the yard as though he owned it. He didn't see me at first, but when he did, he stopped in his tracks. His eyes narrowed, as if sizing me up. And who are you? He asked, his voice cool and calculating. I swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. I wasn't used to being questioned by strangers, especially not ones who clearly had power. I'm just a guest, I said softly, my voice unsure. I live here. The man raised an eyebrow. Live here, he repeated, his tone skeptical. I don't recall seeing you around before. I felt a flush rise to my cheeks, but I stood my ground. I've been here for a while, I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Thomas is my guardian. He studied me for a long moment, his gaze piercing, before his lips curled into something that might have been a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Interesting, he said, almost to himself. Well, I suppose it's none of my business. Where's Thomas? He glanced past me, looking toward the house. Before I could answer, Thomas stepped out of the front door, his face lighting up when he saw the man. Rick, good to see you, Thomas said, his voice warm. Come in, I was just about to head inside. We can talk there. Rick nodded and walked toward the house without another word. I stood there for a moment, feeling like an intruder in my own space. Rick's presence was like a shadow over everything. His tone, the way he looked at me, it was as though I wasn't supposed to be here. It wasn't long before Thomas came back outside, his expression more serious than I had ever seen it. We need to talk, he said, his voice quiet but urgent. I felt a pang of unease in my chest. What's going on? I asked, my mind racing. He hesitated for a moment, his brow furrowing. It's Rick, he said slowly. He's an old friend, but he's also someone who doesn't understand why I've done what I've done. I blinked, confused. What do you mean? He's concerned about you, Thomas said, his voice low. About why you're here. He thinks I'm making a mistake, taking you in. I felt the familiar knot in my stomach tighten. Of course, someone would question my place here. Of course, someone would find a way to make me feel like I didn't belong. But I wasn't about to let that happen. I wasn't about to let them take this from me. What does he want? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Thomas sighed. He wants me to stop this, to end it, to send you away. The words hit me like a punch in the gut. What? I whispered, my voice trembling. He wants to send me away? He thinks you're a risk, Thomas said, his voice tight. He thinks that having you here will cause problems. He doesn't understand why I've taken you in. He doesn't understand that you're not just some project. You're a person, and you deserve a chance. I felt the anger rise within me, hot and fierce. How dare he? How dare anyone try to take away everything I had worked for? I'm not a project, I said, my voice growing stronger. I'm not some charity case. I know, Thomas said, his eyes softening. I know, and I'm not going to let him take you away from this. But it's going to be a fight. The words hit me harder than I expected. A fight. I wasn't just fighting for a future anymore. I was fighting for my right to exist in this world, for my place in it. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. What do we do? I asked, my voice steady now, determination rising in my chest. Thomas smiled, but it was a tight, almost resigned smile. We stand our ground. We show him that you belong here. That you're not just someone who needs help. You're someone who's going to make a difference. I took a deep breath, the weight of his words settling over me. This wasn't going to be easy, and I knew that. But for the first time, I felt a sense of power, a sense of control. I wasn't just a victim of my past anymore. I was fighting for my future, and I wasn't going to back down. Let's do it, I said, my voice unwavering. I'm not going anywhere. Thomas looked at me, his eyes full of pride, and I knew that this was the moment everything had been leading up to. It was time to take the next step. It was time to prove to everyone, to myself, that I belonged here. I had no idea what to expect when I arrived at the meeting with Thomas and Rick, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to back down. I wasn't going to let someone like Rick, someone who didn't understand the work I had put into changing my life, take it all away. The mansion was quiet as we made our way into the living room. Rick was sitting on the couch, his legs crossed, looking like he owned the place. There was something about the way he carried himself that made me feel small, even though I was standing in my own home. He didn't look at me when I entered, but I could feel his eyes on me as I walked past. I didn't look back. Thomas followed me into the room, his face calm, but I could see the tension in his jaw. He wasn't going to let Rick intimidate either of us, I could tell. Thomas, Rick said, not bothering to stand up. We need to talk. Whatever this is, it's not working. His tone was dismissive, and I could feel my blood start to boil. This was my life he was talking about, my chance, and he was just going to throw it all away because it didn't fit into his idea of how things should be. What do you mean, it's not working? Thomas asked, his voice steady but firm. You know exactly what I mean, Rick replied, leaning forward. This is not the kind of environment she needs. You're not giving her a future, Thomas. You're just enabling her. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, but I kept it down, focusing on Thomas. I couldn't let Rick get to me. Not now. I'm giving her a chance, Thomas said, his voice sharp now. A chance to succeed, to make something of herself. Something you would never understand. She's not a project. She's a person. Rick scoffed. A person who doesn't belong here. You're just doing this because you feel sorry for her. I could see Thomas's fists clenching at his sides, but he didn't lose his composure. I'm doing this because she deserves it, he said, his voice low but full of conviction. And if you can't see that, then maybe you're the one who doesn't belong here. The words hung in the air like a challenge. For a moment, Rick said nothing, but his eyes flicked between Thomas and me. You think she's going to be one of you? He asked finally, a sneer on his face. You think she'll ever fit in with people like us? I stood up straight, my heart pounding in my chest. I don't need to fit in with you, I said, my voice strong, surprising even myself. I don't need to be like anyone else. I just need to be me. The room fell silent for a moment as Rick stared at me, his expression one of disbelief. He clearly hadn't expected me to speak up, and for a brief second, I could see a flicker of respect in his eyes. But it didn't last long. He turned back to Thomas, his expression cold again. You're making a mistake, Rick said quietly. This will end badly. You're setting yourself up for failure. Thomas stepped forward, his gaze never leaving Rick's. You don't get to decide what's best for her, Thomas said firmly. This is her life, not yours. And I'm not going to let anyone take that away from her. Rick opened his mouth to say something, but Thomas cut him off. You can leave now, Rick. I've made my decision. For a moment, it seemed like Rick might argue, but instead, he stood up and walked toward the door. He paused when he reached it, turning back to Thomas. I'll be watching, he said, his voice colder than before. You'll regret this. Thomas didn't respond. He simply opened the door and watched Rick leave. As soon as the door closed behind him, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had survived that moment. I had stood my ground. I looked over at Thomas, who was still standing by the door. His face was calm, but I could see the tension in his posture. "You did good," he said quietly. "You stood up for yourself." I felt a rush of relief, but also pride. I had finally found my voice. I wasn't going to let him push me around, I said, my voice shaking slightly. "This is my life, and I'm not going to let anyone take it away." Thomas smiled at me, a small but genuine smile. "I'm proud of you," he said. I felt the warmth of his words settle over me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on the right path. The path wasn't going to be easy. It never would be. But I was learning how to stand up for myself, how to fight for my future. I wasn't just a girl from the streets anymore. I was someone with a purpose. And nothing, not even Rick, was going to take that away from me. I stood by the door, watching as Rick drove away, his black SUV disappearing down the long driveway. For a moment, everything felt strangely quiet, like the air was holding its breath. Thomas had just stood there, watching too, until the sound of the car faded. He turned back toward me, his expression unreadable. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft, but I could hear the concern in it. I nodded, though the rush of emotions swirling inside me made it hard to keep my voice steady. "I'm fine," I said, but my hands were shaking slightly, and I knew he could see it. It was just. I didn't expect him to say all that. Thomas stepped forward, his gaze gentle but intense. "You handled it better than I thought you would. You stood your ground." I looked up at him, the words hitting me in ways I hadn't expected. "I didn't think I could," I admitted quietly. "But I did. I actually stood up for myself." His smile was small but sincere, and for the first time, I could see the pride in his eyes. "You've come a long way," he said. "It wasn't just me who believed in you, it was always you. You've had the strength all along." His words felt like a light lifting some of the weight I had carried for so long. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was learning to fight for myself, to stand up for what was mine. It wasn't just about fitting in or proving my worth to others. It was about proving to myself that I deserved this chance. As we sat down together in the living room, the silence between us wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, like we didn't need to fill the space with words. We both knew what had just happened. Rick had left, and he wasn't going to be an obstacle anymore. But something in me shifted. I had never felt more certain of my place in this world than I did in that moment. I wasn't just some girl who had been given a second chance. I was someone who had earned this life, every bit of it. "I know this isn't going to be easy," I said, breaking the silence. "There's still a lot to prove, still a lot of people who don't get it. But I'm not going to back down." Thomas nodded, his expression serious. "And you shouldn't. This is your future, and no one can take it from you. Not Rick, not anyone. But it's not just about fighting for your place here. It's about fighting for yourself. It's about building a life that's yours, and no one can take that from you unless you let them." His words rang in my ears, settling into my mind like a mantra. I had spent so many years thinking of myself as a survivor, someone who only made it by scraping through life. But now, I wasn't just surviving. I was living. I was building something I could be proud of, and that was worth fighting for. The next day, I woke up with a new sense of purpose. The weight of the past still lingered, but it no longer defined me. I wasn't the girl from the streets anymore. I was someone who had the strength to change her future, no matter what anyone else thought. When I arrived at school, things felt a little different. The stares, the whispers, they were still there, but they didn't bother me the way they used to. I wasn't going to let them. I walked through the halls with my head held high, my steps more confident than they had ever been. The students who had looked at me like I didn't belong were still there, but today, I wasn't concerned with fitting into their world. I was building my own. As I walked into my first class, I was greeted with a few nods, a few curious glances. It didn't matter. I wasn't here to prove anything to anyone. I was here to prove something to myself. And that was enough. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I sat through my classes, focused more than ever before, knowing that I had to make the most of this opportunity. But no matter how much I focused, my mind kept drifting back to what had happened the day before. I had stood up for myself. I had fought for my place in this world, and for the first time, I didn't feel like an imposter. I felt like I belonged. After school, I walked home with a newfound sense of pride. I wasn't just walking down the street anymore. I was walking toward my future, and nothing was going to stop me. When I got home, Thomas was in the kitchen, making dinner. The The smell of something cooking filled the house, and for a moment, it felt like everything was just as it should be. As I walked into the kitchen, he looked up at me with a smile. "How was school?" he asked, his voice full of curiosity. "It was good," I said, my voice steady. "I'm starting to feel like I can actually do this." He nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I knew you could." I walked over to him and stood for a moment, unsure of what to say. But before I could speak, he placed a plate of food in front of me, the steam rising from it, filling the room with warmth. "You've earned this," he said, his voice gentle. "Everything you're working for." I sat down, looking at the food in front of me. It wasn't just a meal. It was a symbol of everything I had fought for, everything I had earned. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building a life, a future, and that, more than anything, was the greatest reward. As I took my first bite, I realized that this was the beginning of something new. I wasn't just a girl with a past. I was someone who had a future I was going to make for myself. And no one, not Rick or anyone else, could take that away from me. I woke up the next morning to a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in a long time. It was like a switch had flipped in me overnight, an understanding that I wasn't just walking through life anymore, I was actively building it. My path, though still uncertain at times, had a direction, and it was mine. That thought, the realization that I could shape my own future, was enough to fill me with a sense of peace as I started my day. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind. Every day brought new challenges, new obstacles, but I was learning how to face them. I was learning how to trust in myself, to believe that I was worth the opportunities one had been given. As I got ready for school, the familiar nerves crept up again. The whispers, the stares, the doubt. I had gotten better at ignoring them, but it didn't mean they didn't still exist. It didn't mean the world had fully accepted me, but that didn't matter anymore. What mattered was what I believed about myself. I wasn't just surviving, I was living, and I was going to keep moving forward, no matter what. When I arrived at school, it felt a little different. The hallway wasn't as noisy, the air wasn't as thick with judgment. Maybe I was just imagining it, or maybe something had actually changed. But either way, it didn't matter. I walked through the halls, my steps steady, my mind focused. This was my life now. This was where I was meant to be. And for the first time, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me as I walked into my homeroom. The students around me were talking, but no one was paying much attention to me, and that was fine. I wasn't here to be the center of attention. I wasn't here to prove anything to anyone. I was here for me. I sat down at my desk, feeling the weight of the normalcy of it all. The bell rang, signaling the start of class, and I settled into my routine. The lesson began, and I focused, not because I was trying to impress anyone, but because I wanted to be there. I wanted to learn. As the class went on, I could feel the shift in me. I wasn't just passing the time anymore. I was engaged. I was a part of this, and it felt good. Later that day, I saw Lucy in the hallway between classes. She waved, her usual bright smile on her face. "Hey, how's it going?" she asked as I caught up with her. "Good," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "I'm actually starting to get the hang of this." She laughed, the sound light and easy. "I knew you would. You've been doing great." I smiled back at her, grateful for her support. "Thanks," I said, feeling a little lighter. As the days went by, I felt the weight of my fears begin to fade. They were still there, the doubts, the fears of not fitting in, of not being good enough. But they didn't control me anymore. I had learned to live with them, to accept that they were just part of the process. What mattered was that I was trying. What mattered was that I was building my future. And no matter how hard it got, I wasn't going to stop. That week, Thomas and I sat down for another conversation. It wasn't planned, but I knew it was something we needed to do. We hadn't talked about my future in a while, and I needed to know where we stood, where I stood. We sat in the living room, the house quiet around us, as we talked. "You're doing well," Thomas said, his voice steady. "I can see how much you've changed, but I want you to know something." I looked up at him, waiting for him to continue. "This is just the beginning," he said. "You've taken the first steps, but there's more to come. I know it's been hard, but I want you to remember that I'm here for you, no matter what." I nodded, a sense of gratitude filling me. "I'm not going to give up," I said, my voice firm. "I know it won't be easy, but I'm going to keep trying." Thomas smiled, his eyes softening. "I believe in you," he said simply. And in that moment, I realized that I wasn't just doing this for him, for Thomas, or anyone else. I was doing it for me. I was fighting for my future. And that meant everything. The next few weeks passed in a blur of schoolwork, new experiences, and small victories. I kept pushing myself, kept proving to myself that I wasn't just a product of my past. I wasn't defined by where I had come from. I was who I was, and I was going to build something that was mine. I knew there would be setbacks. There would be days when I wanted to quit, when it would feel like everything was too much. But I also knew that I had a support system now, something I had never had before. I had people who believed in me, and more importantly, I had started to believe in myself. That belief didn't come overnight. It didn't come from one conversation or one day of doing well in school. It came from the small moments, the quiet victories, the days when I got through something I thought I couldn't. It came from the courage to face each new challenge, no matter how hard it seemed. And I realized, for the first time, that I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. I was becoming someone I could be proud of. That evening, after finishing my homework, I sat on the porch, looking out at the sunset. The sky was a mixture of soft oranges and purples, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. I had a future now, and it wasn't just a dream. It was real, and I was ready to keep building it, one step at a time. I stood by the window, looking out at the vast garden stretching out before me. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden light across the flowers and trees. It had been months since I first arrived at the mansion, and with every passing day, I had grown in ways I had never imagined. I had faced challenges, doubts, and fears, but through it all, I had learned to stand tall and fight for my place in this world. The road had not been easy, and there were still moments when I felt uncertain, but I had come so far. I wasn't the same girl who had arrived here, unsure of her worth. I had found my strength. As I reflected on the journey, I thought about all the people who had supported me. Thomas, who had never given up on me, who had always believed in me even when I couldn't believe in myself. Lucy, who had been there for me from the very start, offering kindness when I had needed it most. And even the teachers and staff at school, who had given me a chance when I wasn't sure I deserved it. I had found a community, a place where I was accepted for who I was, and more importantly, where I was given the opportunity to grow. But the most important person I had found on this journey was myself. I had learned to trust in my own abilities, to believe in my potential. I had learned that I didn't need to prove myself to anyone except myself. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I had control over my future. I had a future. It was no longer just a dream. It was real. As I stood there, lost in thought, I heard footsteps approaching behind me. I turned around to see Thomas walking into the room, a smile on his face. "I thought I'd find you here," he said, his voice warm. I smiled back at him, feeling a sense of gratitude wash over me. "Just thinking," I said softly. He nodded, stepping closer. "I know you've been through a lot, and I know there are still challenges ahead. But I want you to know that I'm proud of you. I've seen how far you've come, and I know you're capable of so much more." His words hit me deeper than I expected. I had never been one to seek validation, but hearing it from him, someone who had seen me at my lowest and still believed in me, meant everything. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. Thomas smiled, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You don't need to thank me. You've done all the hard work. All I did was believe in you." We stood there for a moment, in the quiet of the room, the weight of the past slowly fading away. For the first time, I felt truly at peace. I wasn't fighting anymore. I wasn't just trying to survive. I was thriving. The future was no longer a distant hope. It was something I could see, something I could reach for, and I was going to take it. I had the strength to shape my own destiny. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but I was no longer afraid. I had the tools I needed to face whatever came next. I wasn't alone, and I wasn't powerless. I had a place in this world, and I had a purpose. And that purpose was mine to define. The next day, I woke up with a renewed sense of clarity. The sun was shining, the air was fresh, and the world seemed full of possibilities. I was no longer just a girl who had stumbled into a new life. I was someone who had earned it. I had worked hard, faced my fears, and overcome obstacles that I never thought I could. And I wasn't done yet. The path ahead was waiting for me, and I was ready to walk it. I got dressed, took a deep breath, and headed out the door. As I walked toward the school bus, I felt a surge of excitement. The day felt different. I wasn't just going through the motions. I was taking charge of my life. And nothing could stop me now. I knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but I was no longer afraid of what might come. Because I knew that no matter what, I could face it. I could do it. And that was the greatest gift I had ever given myself. The future was mine to shape, and I was ready to embrace it. With every step, I was moving closer to the person I was meant to be.